Hello, everyone, and welcome back to On the Brink. Today, we're talking to Jeff Kirt, the CEO of Greenidge Generation Holdings, and Ted Rogers, the vice chairman of Greenidge, about the Greenidge power plant in upstate New York. This has been the target of some very intense and pretty misleading press coverage, including articles broadcasted by Elon Musk. And I wanted to give them an opportunity to explain what they're doing, how their mine operates, how the power plant works, and get the facts straight about the Greenidge mine in upstate New York. Let's dive right into the episode.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
The federal government loans American International Group, AIG, $85 billion.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep.
The federal government is stepping in to stabilize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants that have been threatened by the housing crisis.
The Bank of England has pumped £75 billion more into Britain's ailing economy with a new round of quantitative easing.
You print a couple $1 trillion, and all of a sudden, people start to worry. So out of this worry, we have something called the Bitcoin.
Okay, today we have a really interesting conversation. I'm here with Jeff Kirt, the CEO of Greenidge LLC, and Ted Rogers, who's on the board. Really appreciate you both being here with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having us.
This is going to be a really interesting one because Greenidge has been all over the news lately. Did you guys expect this level of press coverage when you started out?
No, we never imagined it. We really got into Bitcoin mining. I don't want to say by chance, but we had surplus power as a merchant power plant. It started with purchasing, a handful of rigs on Amazon a few years ago, and really just kind of learning as we went. It grew into a 1 megawatt pilot project that was kind of done in the basement of the power plant, but was generating some nice cash flow. And as a result, we decided to expand it significantly, and it really ramped up commercially early last year, early 2020, and has continued to grow since. We've continued to install miners and expand capacity. And again, we were a privately owned merchant power plant, really just managing for cash flow. And kind of late in 2020, early 2021, decided that we wanted to raise institutional capital and go public because the story behind Bitcoin mining was pretty compelling, but it's capital intensive and requires access to capital markets or institutional capital, more capital than we had. And that's kind of how we got to where we are right now. We announced in March a transaction where we will be listed on the NASDAQ. And we have right now just our single 106 megawatt facility in upstate New York. We have plans to take that up to a max of 85 megawatts of Bitcoin mining. And we're actively looking at other locations, mainly in the U.S., not exclusively in the U.S., to expand our mining operation. And just to answer your question, no, we never envisioned this being much of a story for the press, really, in our Bitcoin mining operation. The plant's been around since 1937. It was originally a coal-fired plant that we converted to gas in the last 6 or 7 years, and really never imagined the amount of press it may draw.
So, Jeff, how did you come to be interested in Bitcoin mining? I mean, tell us a little bit about your own trajectory in this space.
Sure. So I joined as CEO recently this year. I've been working with the company. I was brought on by the folks at Atlas, who are the private equity sponsor that really kind of created and transformed Greenidge into what it is today. Personally, in terms of Bitcoin interest, I've been nothing more than like many out there, a Bitcoin enthusiast, someone who personally owned Bitcoin. And I became involved with this project. I had followed it kind of from inception when Atlas purchased it in 2014. I, was on the sidelines for the endeavors into Bitcoin mining, and was kind of acting as an advisor to the company, to Greenidge, and before they made the decision to take it public, the individuals at Atlas asked if I'd join as CEO, and that's kind of how I joined full time. So I'm definitely, this is my first job in the Bitcoin space. Heretofore, I've simply been a consumer, an investor in Bitcoin.
Well, it's a baptism by fire. Ted, you fellow DC native, fellow DC sports fan. We have that shared experience.
Yes,
of
painful.
I'm a long-suffering DC sports fan. You're former NFL player, right?
Yes. Back in the last good old days with the Redskins. Yeah, 91 to 93.
We legally can't call them the Redskins anymore.
You're right. The Washington football team.
We're gonna be canceled by the podcast police. The Washington football team. So, what was the duration of your tenure on it? Not to get distracted, but with the Redskins,
Yeah.
when did you play for them?
So the first mini camp that I went to, I signed as a free agent out of college, out of Williams College up in Massachusetts, and I left briefly in the spring of '91 in April for the first mini camp, which was a surreal experience, given that I'd spent my childhood and actually up to that very moment being a fan rather than a player. And as soon as I graduated, I went directly to DC for mini camps and then training camp. And my time with them lasted until July of '93. Joe Gibbs had retired, Richie Pettibone had taken over, and I had been injured and appropriately was cut by Richie. I had lost a step due to injury, and I was out. So I went to law school and couldn't get football off the brain. So I left law school midway through and went to the World League. Was with the Scotland Claymores, trying to get back into the NFL, and promptly blew out my other knee. So I figured something was trying to tell me something, and I went back to law school with my tail between my legs. And actually spent about 20 years in the professional wilderness, did some fun stuff in finance and tech and whatever. But until I encountered Bitcoin in 2013, I never had found something that was as important to me and as fulfilling as football. And it's been everything football was and more.
That's stirring. Yeah, I guess crypto people are often unaware that you are a former professional athlete, and you're mostly known for having been president of Zoppo. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you came to join the board of Greenidge and why you chose to join this firm.
Sure. So when we sold the institutional business of Zappo, the custody business of Zappo to Coinbase in August of 2019, I was about ready to move on. I'd had a great experience with Wences and deeply grateful to him and to Zappo. I've been with them since late 2013. And I needed to want to take some time away. I thought I was going to do all sorts of interesting stuff, write the great American novel and coach and blah, blah, blah. And I basically stared at my navel or the ceiling alternatively for a period of months. And then I realized, I wanted to get back into the game, and I wanted to help Bitcoin. That was the first priorities. And my feeling was that the places where Bitcoin needed the most help, one of them was mining, and one of them, it felt to me like one of the attack vectors on Bitcoin was going to come from the criticism of Bitcoin mining. And probably we could use some help explaining the importance of Bitcoin mining, the national strategic importance of it, the importance to humanity. And so I let Wences know. Wences is he's not just the patient zero for Bitcoin in Silicon Valley. He is, if you trace the genealogy of most people in Bitcoin, even crypto, quote unquote, it will in some way lead back to Wences, 6 degrees of separation. So Wences met Tim Fazio from Atlas, close friend of Jeff's, and Wences connected Tim with me, and I talked to the Atlas team. I talked to Jeff, And they're just a great group of people. Jeff maybe can talk a little bit about Atlas's background. They're a private equity firm, and they're pretty much the opposite of the vulture capitalist sort of caricature. They go into old economy type businesses, steel mills and places like that, and actually rehab the businesses and work with unions and keep jobs. They don't fire people and shade people off. They're a great group of people, Jeff included. So it felt like the right horse to ride in the Bitcoin space. And my only concern is making sure I do the most that I can to help them.
That's awesome. Well, you're obviously very well known, very respected in the Bitcoin community. So it certainly pricked up my ears when I saw the announcement. And then I guess a few months later, like all of the negative press coverage started dropping, which took me by surprise because, I looked at the cursory details of the Greenidge plant, but it seemed to vastly differ from the way it was being characterized in the press. And so with the main thing being, this is formerly a coal-fired plant, and then you guys actually converted it to natural gas. Is that right?
Oh, that's right. The plant was, the plant, it's been around since 1937. At one point, it had 4 coal-fired generators. It was, New York was deregulated in the late 90s, and the plant became a merchant coal plant. After the financial crisis in 2010 or 2011, it was idled, and it was involved in a bankruptcy. And as Ted mentioned, Atlas has a history of buying businesses and kind of not just industries that are potentially in decline, but assets that have been troubled in the past. And what they saw in this plant was it was very close to an unconstrained gas pipeline. And I won't get into the details right now about what that means, but there's abundant gas that was 4.5 miles away from the plant. And the plant had modern emissions controls, modern coal emissions controls, many of which were applicable to natural gas. In fact, the only ones that aren't really applicable are not applicable because they scrub for pollutants that natural gas doesn't emit at all, like sulfur dioxide. So Atlas purchased the plant in 2014. They proceeded to convert the boiler to natural gas and buy up right of way to construct a pipeline 4.5 miles to the unconstrained pipeline that was nearby. We own that pipeline, and when all of that was said and done, and it's worth noting, the local kind of press coverage. There was I'd say a vocal minority in the area that opposed the plant starting at all as a natural gas plant, and that's been something associated with the plant since 2014. But the plant's obtained a new air permit from the EPA as if it was a new plant. It obtained all the proper environmental permits and commenced operation in 2017. And I think in many ways this is not unique in terms of an Atlas type story. As Ted mentioned, they have a 20-year track record of investing in businesses that are often older world economies like paper, lumber, forest products, structural steel that's used in bridges and buildings, auto parts manufacturing. And a lot of these businesses have gone through a bankruptcy. They have legacy environmental problems or legacy environmental liabilities that are a result of decades of prior ownership and therefore are a challenge to purchase. But these are necessary industries in the U.S. We need paper to print and write on. We need lumber. We need structural steel for infrastructure, and they also have an excellent reputation working with environmental authorities, working with organized labor, and that's kind of unusual for private equity investors. Those are typically areas where private equity investors don't excel, and they really do excel in those areas. And part of it's just their culture. They have a culture of safety first. It's very focused on the workforce. They have 40,000 employees across the globe. And I think, like many organizations, the culture sort of flows top down from the founders. And as Ted said, the founders of Atlas are just genuinely good human beings and do the right thing, including environmentally, especially environmentally. And if it wasn't for all of that coming into this with all of that knowledge, I wouldn't have been as comfortable as I am joining as the CEO. But they, so the plant started running in 2017 as a merchant power plant, and really got into Bitcoin mining as an ancillary source of revenue and cash flow. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of now evolved to the point where it's, the bulk of the cash flows are coming from Bitcoin mining.
So referring to necessary industries, Ted, maybe if you'd like to weigh in on, your views on Bitcoin mining and its strategic importance to the U.S. and the merits of onshoring Bitcoin mining, which seems to be sort of currently occurring.
Yeah. God, what an opportunity at this moment. And I confess to feeling a bit of frustration that we're having this discussion about the environmental aspects of Bitcoin mining, especially given what I know about what Greenidge does and how environmentally conscious they are. But let's just back up for a second. Bitcoin is going to be the global reserve currency, and it's going to be the center of the future financial world. And I think that the people that are arguing about whether there should be Bitcoin mining and whether Bitcoin mining should occur in the U.S. and whether it's worth the energy have a profound misunderstanding of what Bitcoin is and what it is going to be in the future society of the world. So given what I believe very strongly about the future of Bitcoin, I say, well, where do we want the center of the Bitcoin universe to be? I would much prefer it be in the still relatively free West than in the authoritarian East or in other places that are not friendly to innovation and transparency and to individual liberty. So, here we are in the United States at sort of a crossroads where we can take a route with Bitcoin of fear-based regulation first, suppress it, shut it down, control it, or we can be what we are when we're at our best, which is allow for risk-taking, embrace innovation, allow the entrepreneurs to either flourish or fail as they might. That's who we are, and that's when we're at our best, and that's when we do our best as a country. And Bitcoin mining is probably, since maybe the mid-90s with the advent of the internet and good decisions that the Clinton administration did about removing liabilities and things like that from people participating in the internet, this is the most important thing to come along since then. And if we were to just take a different route for a second, that we said, you know what, we're going to grab the baton and jump to the front of the parade. We're going to encourage Bitcoin mining in the United States. Yes, we're going to ask for certain standards environmentally, but we're going to encourage miners to come here. We're going to try and support people who want to fabricate chips here, want to build the equipment here. We're going to work with entrepreneurs and make the U.S. the center of the Bitcoin world. We'd actually have a pretty good chance of getting out of this tremendous, deep, debt-laden hole that we've dug ourselves into with infinite money printing. So, look, it's fine that Elon Musk and other people want to weigh in about how much carbon Bitcoin mining is or isn't releasing into the atmosphere, but they're missing the forest for the trees. And the whole Bitcoin Mining Council, I don't know if we should talk about that or not, but it should be talked about in the context of how important Bitcoin is to the world and what place we want the United States to take in that Bitcoin-centric world.
Were you guys invited to join the council?
Thankfully, no. Nick, I'll tell you, I don't think it'll come as a surprise to you that a lot of this is informed by my experience as a zealous advocate of Segwit 2X. I was a vocal and active proponent of increasing the block size from 1 megabyte to 2. I was convinced that if we just got together and made a compromise, come on, let's go. We're going to meet a consensus in New York. It was May of 2017, 4 years ago. It's all in good faith. Everybody's invited. Come on, we're not hiding anything. All we want is a compromise. Just we'll go from 1 megabyte to 2. No big deal, right? Well, it was a big deal. And regardless of what our intent was, we were centralizing control over the Bitcoin protocol. And people were absolutely right to resist us. And thank God we got our nose bloodied and we lost. And I realized at that point, that really was the moment where Bitcoin became digital gold. It was the moment Bitcoin won the store value use case. And when we realized no group of people, no group of billionaires, no group of companies and VC-backed, the miners, no one is going to change Bitcoin. And in fact, any type of centralization of control of Bitcoin or an attempt to speak for it is generally going to be rejected by the community, and probably should be, actually definitely should be. And B, we are handing the enemies of Bitcoin an arm to twist. Yeah, first they say, yeah, okay, great. So we're going to need you to abide by these standards, otherwise you can't do it. Okay, we were going to do that anyway. We want to be environmentally sound and be stewards of the environment. No problem. Oh, and by the way, you can't mine any transactions that haven't gone through KYC. What? Oh, yeah. Marathon Mining's already said they're not going to mine non-OFAC transactions, Pretty soon, Bitcoin doesn't have an energy problem. It's got a fungibility problem. These things are, and of course they start out with the best of intentions. But they are, generally speaking, not good for Bitcoin, and they're going to be resisted heavily. Now, all that said, if Greenidge felt, as a member of the board, obviously there's a duty to shareholders of the company, and if it was determined that the best interest of the shareholders was to join some kind of association or whatever, then okay. But I'm just saying, from a personal point of view, I've seen this movie before, and it's not a great idea.
One thing that we think is kind of getting lost in the whole debate is the U.S., one of the attributes of Bitcoin that we all know is because it's so decentralized, the data is not entirely reliable, or, it's hard to get consistent data, but best studies indicate that the U.S. is something like 7% of the global hash rate in Bitcoin mining. And so we're 7% of the global hash rate, but no one really, and then of the rest of the other 93%, a huge chunk is in, the vast majority of it is in countries like China, Russia, Iran, Kazakhstan, that have much different environmental policies and controls and regulations than we have here. And the other thing that's not really talked about at all is just the efficiency of the U.S. mining fleet. And I'm not just talking about Greenwich's miners. I'm not saying that ours are any more or less efficient than any other U.S. miner. But if you look at the studies, our miners are more than twice as efficient, or consume less than half as much energy per unit of output per terahash as the global fleet. And I think we're probably average, more or less average for U.S. mining. So you have 7% of the mining capacity that's consuming, order of magnitude 3.5% of the electrical consumption of the entire network, just purely based on efficiency, before you layer in how much carbon output there is per unit of electricity that's going into that electricity. And I haven't seen studies on it, but just my gut is that the carbon output of the U.S. Bitcoin network per megawatt hour consumed is lower than the global network. So, if if the U.S. again is 7% of the global hash rate, I don't know if we're 3 or 2.5 or what the number is, but it's some very low single-digit number of the carbon output of the U.S. And we took the step earlier in May to announce that starting June 1st next week, we are going to be 100% carbon neutral in our mining operation. And it's a decision that we didn't just make overnight. It's something that we debated over a long time. We looked at the different options, and there are several, to achieve carbon neutrality. We determined that purchasing carbon offsets was the best option for us. I'm not saying it's the best option for everyone. I just think we came to the conclusion it's the best option for Greenidge. And starting June 1st, we're going to buy carbon offset credits to offset 100% of our CO2 output. And we know exactly what our CO2 output is because we're required to monitor it daily. We know the exact amount that we emit, and we know how much of that's going to mining, and we're going to offset 100% of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, the offset discussion is definitely going to get louder in the Bitcoin miner space. I've been looking into it as well. In terms of the nature of the offsets, is there anything you can tell me about the source? What is sort of happening on the other end, so to speak? It's kind of a little bit Byzantine to me, that market.
Yeah. So what the offset market is, a carbon offset is generated when someone someone has a project that either captures carbon from the atmosphere, the biggest of which would be forestry, capturing carbon from the atmosphere, or embarks on a project that captures carbon that otherwise would have been emitted.
Right.
And an example of that could be landfill gas. Methane gas coming off landfills is a big source of carbon, and capturing that methane and then using that methane for power generation. We made the decision that we wanted to act locally or relatively locally. The market for certified offsets, and it's worth noting, the California Air Resources Board is kind of the gold standard for offset credits, and they recognize 3 agencies that credit the carbon offset credits, and all the offset credits that we're purchasing are credited by one of the 3 agencies. We made the decision that, and you can buy offset credits that are generated anywhere on the globe. We made the decision that we wanted to buy 100% domestic credits. Mm-hmm. So we are, some of the areas we're assembling a portfolio of credits. We didn't just pick one project or one type of credit that we want to buy. We're assembling a portfolio, and we're working with some third parties in assembling the portfolio. But it's a mix of things like forestry, landfill gas, power generation that I mentioned, and the recipient of the offset credit is the person that embarks on the project, because the project in and of itself may not be economical or maybe much less economical than it is with the credit. So the person embarking on the project sells that credit to help subsidize the cost, and therefore by purchasing credits, and this is well-traveled ground. Many large consumer-facing companies use offset credits to offset their fossil fuel emissions from their fleets of trucks, fleets of aircraft, or other sources of CO2. But by purchasing the credits, we're helping finance these projects that are reducing carbon in the atmosphere. And we determined, because we own a fossil fuel plant, that was the right solution for us. There are other solutions that are out there that may be and probably are better for someone in a different position that doesn't own a fossil fuel plant. But having researched it pretty extensively, we determined that was the best course of action for us. So returning to some of the misconceptions people have, as I personally have dived into the quote unquote Bitcoin energy debate, the worst debate in the world, I have learned so much about how energy is produced and consumed in society. I mean, it's really a rabbit hole that rivals Bitcoin in terms of its depth. It's unbelievable. Learning about, I spent a huge amount of time trying to
demystify the Chinese energy grid, because of course that's where a lot of Bitcoin is mined. Absolutely fascinating dynamics there. We get into a little bit later. In terms of the U.S. energy grid, it has been so interesting because the carbon intensity of the U.S. grid has come down in the last decade. And as I learned, this is due to the influence of natural gas. So people don't understand that not all thermal sources of energy generation are identical from a carbon intensity perspective. Right. In fact, there's enormous differences. So they just tend to lump fossil fuels all in one sort of mental category. And so to them, it doesn't matter if it's coal or gas or whatever, but actually gas is much less worse than coal from a carbon intensity perspective, right?
It is, and the math of it, or the data of it, is such that there's about a 75% increase per unit of thermal output burning coal versus burning natural gas. So it's about 75% more carbon intensive. In other words, if we were operating our plant as a 106 megawatt coal plant instead of 106 megawatt gas plant, it would generate 75% more CO2, but also a series of other pollutants that it doesn't. There's carbon is easy to measure because it's generated by many sources, but it's not the only metric. Things like SOx and NOx emissions, there are no sulfur emissions at all whatsoever with natural gas. It's significant with coal. Natural gas has less NOx emissions than coal. It has no what they call particulate matter, or kind of little pieces of soot that get in the air that coal does, and all of those are just other factors that you get with coal that you don't with natural gas. The U.S. grid right now is about 40% gas, 20% coal. The grid in New York State where we operate is 45% gas, 0 coal. There are some standby oil-fired plants in the area, but there's no coal in New York State.
Yeah, and I looked into the New York energy mix out of curiosity, as one does when I saw that New York policymakers were thinking about this moratorium, and I reflected to myself, well, hang on a second. New York State's energy mix is actually pretty good from a U.S. perspective, let alone a global perspective. So it's really good from a carbon intensity standpoint. And so if they ban...
Right, the nuclear and hydro, it has much more nuclear.
Yeah, I mean, the hydro in upstate New York, I actually have been to a Bitcoin farm in Messina, New York, the Coin Mint facility, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, that's on the banks of a river. I don't remember what it was called exactly, but it was a really big river. There's a lot of hydro up there. And so I was reflecting to myself, well, hang on a second. If the New York state legislator put some sort of ban on Bitcoin mining, they are going to increase Bitcoin's emissions footprint causally, because most likely the hash rate that leaves New York and flows to other jurisdictions will be more carbon intense.
No, you're right. New York has 3 times as much hydro as the overall grid in the U.S. and has just under 50% more nuclear than the rest of the grid in the U.S. and has 0 coal.
So really, if they want to reduce Bitcoin's climate impact, they should encourage the mining of Bitcoin.
Right. That's what the data would show.
But that's the point, Nick. They don't think that mining Bitcoin is worth it, period. And that's why this is I know we have to engage in this debate, but it's hard to engage in debate with people who don't understand the value of Bitcoin first as part of a context, because there are always trade-offs involved in what are you going to expend energy on and what are you not. And if you believe that Bitcoin has no value, it doesn't matter if we're using natural gas or hydro or anything else. They're going to think it's a waste.
Right. So with regards to the plant, I guess the other thing that people don't understand is that you guys are not solely mining Bitcoin. You're also producing energy, which goes to the grid, correct?
Right. So, for instance, last year, 60% of the energy that we generated last year went to the grid. We're supplying power to the grid. I'm just pausing to make sure this is accurate. Literally every second. There isn't a second that's gone by this year, or really while the plant's been running for the last, more than 12 months, where power hasn't been supplied to the grid. We will always supply a substantial piece of our power to the grid. We don't have plans to take the mining operation at our plant above 85 megawatts, and that's out of a 106 megawatt plant. We're asked a lot about our response time in an emergency, or would we be there as emergency power to the grid, especially given what happened in Texas this winter. And the way it works is, before we were Bitcoin mining, the plant wasn't always on. There would be periods of time where the plant would be shut down, and then the system operator would call the plant and say, we'd like to have the plant up and running. We need the electrons for whatever the load is on the grid. For some reason, for grid stability, they wanted the plant up, and we would say, okay, we'll be there in 14 hours. It took 12 to 14 hours to start up. So if they called at 6 a.m., we'd say, okay, we'll shoot for 6 p.m., but we can guarantee we'll be up and running, by 8 p.m. Well, now the plant runs 24/7, and we can increase nearly instantaneously, and we can bump up the amount of electricity supplied to the grid by 2 megawatts a minute. So if something like Texas happened, and we had to shut down all the mining and immediately ramp up the plant to full capacity, supply that to the grid, and shut down mining, that can all be done in less than an hour.
So because Bitcoin is your alternative buyer, you're now much more responsive to the grid's needs.
Right, because we have a 24/7 customer in the Bitcoin mine. We're able to ramp it up much more quickly, and also without a startup charge. There was a startup charge associated with the cold start when the plant was off before. There's no startup charge because the plant's already running. And the other interesting thing is, New York is a capacity market. This gets in a little bit of the details about the electricity market, but plants in New York are paid just to be there, just to be on the grid if needed for grid stability. Well, the megawatts that we use for mining are not counted in that capacity payment, but our plant is still on the grid. So if the polar vortex happened, or something like happened recently in Texas occurred in New York, we could and would supply all of our power to the grid, but the grid is only paying us. The grid is not paying us for the portion that we're using for Bitcoin mining, even though it's there. So the ratepayers are paying less, and ultimately it's the ratepayer that pays for all this, right? So the ratepayers are paying less for capacity that's still there, and our response time is better.
So I have to ask you guys about the trout. This is something that I keep seeing somehow in the discourse. People seem very concerned about the trout. So what is the concern about the trout, and is this something that people should be worried about?
So, it stems from words in our water permit, not from our actions, but from the words in our water permit. So in terms of the actual data, we publicize the data of the intake temp and the outtake temp.
I saw
from the water that we bring in, and the average temp during trout season this year was 49 degrees, I believe. And on average, the water that we discharged was between 6 and 7 degrees warmer than the intake water that we received. The words of the permit say that we are allowed to discharge water up to 108 degrees. And all that means is we would be in kind of like a bright line violation if we discharged above 108 degrees. And, the water that we take in is not going to be made cooler, obviously, running it through our planet. It's going to warm up. So there are times in summer where the water that we take in is over 80 degrees. So the water coming out of the plant is going to be in the 90s in the peak of the warmest season in August. But the average, I don't want to misquote, so I forget the average temp, but I do know that in trout season it was 49 degrees. And over the course of the entire year, I believe the average increase in temp, and this is all in Fahrenheit for anyone that's that just to be clear, but the average increase in temp is 8 degrees throughout the course of the calendar year.
So we oughtn't be concerned about the trout. The trout are going to be just fine, basically.
Right. And we do have people that that call the plant or just read the paper that we're discharging 108 degree water in the lake, which is simply untrue. But they believe it and call the plant and complain, or write letters and complain. And there's only, again, we publish the data. It's very difficult because, again, it's a number and a permit. It's easy for someone to fixate on and point to and say, oh, they're discharging 108 degree water into the lake when it's 5 degrees outside.
Right. So I want to talk briefly about this hash rate transition the world is going through. So China has begun, it looks like, credibly cracking down on Bitcoin miners. The province of Inner Mongolia, basically independently of the central government, had already begun their own crackdown. Inner Mongolia is 70% coal, 30% solar and wind, give or take. But of course, the big bad in China is Xinjiang province. I'm probably garbling that, but heavily coal-fired, probably around 60% coal. During the dry season, lots of mining occurs there. During the wet season, it goes to Sichuan, Yunnan, which is actually where the hash rate should be now. We're in the wet season. Looks like the Chinese central government is kind of fed up with all this mining. And there's been a big move in the last week from China miners to look for capacity elsewhere. So I want to ask you guys, have you actually fielded calls from, panicked Chinese miners looking for hosting capacity out here in the cleaner USA? And second of all, what do you make of this opportunity to kind of reset the narrative, move away from this notion of Bitcoin being mined with Chinese coal and mine Bitcoin with much cleaner US energy?
Right. So to answer the first question, yes, we've been contacted directly by. It's funny, the people that we've been contacted with are not domiciled in China, but say they have significant mining operations and assets in China, but that they're looking to get out of China, and I believe them. But it's just interesting to note that they're domiciled somewhere in Southeast Asia, just not in China.
So the rumors are true, basically. I think
the rumors are true, and I don't know if those people are just on the forefront or just paranoid. But these are calls that we had not been receiving until very recently. So there's definitely an impact. It's definitely impacting people's actions. I think one thing that isn't talked about much as it pertains to the U.S., and I don't know about the rest of the world, but I'm asked a lot about miner availability for new miners that are on order in the U.S., given the chip shortage and how that's going to impact everything. And I'm really not concerned about the availability of miners. I think that the U.S. is getting very short on places to put the miners.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, if you're going to expand a mining operation, you obviously need the mining equipment, but you also need a place to plug it in and at the required voltage. And that voltage is different than the transmission voltage or the voltage of a major former industrial site. And there's a big lead time on the equipment that's required to step down that voltage. And the lead time on that equipment is maybe not as long as miners, but not that much shorter. And I know for a fact, we're seeing it because we're not only getting calls from people in Southeast Asia about miners, but we get calls from people in the US that have miners delivering that they're not going to have space to plug them in for 3, 4, 5 months, and they're asking if we have space. And the answer is we don't, because we're managing our own build. And we've done a good job because everything we do is in-house. We don't outsource any of our hosting or any of our we do all of our engineering in-house. We don't do our own construction. We contract that out to local contractors. But we're just, given the fact that we grew up as a power plant, we're pretty good at project management, planning all that, and having spare parts and redundant equipment on site. So we've been lucky enough to meet our build timelines. But I think as an industry, I think people are a little bit behind the ball there. And I'm not saying that's true of everybody. I'm just saying that there are definitely some companies out there that are looking for space for miners that they have that are idle. And given that dynamic, I don't think there's a lot of room for the machines coming out of China in the US, which tend to be older, less efficient machines, right? Everybody in the US is making room for much more efficient machines. And the efficiency matters, obviously, not just because of the environmental impact, but just the pure dollars and cents of mining with a more efficient machine. So I don't know what'll happen. I don't know if in fact there is a big piece of capacity that is low efficiency capacity that wants to leave China. I don't know that it will all find a home in the near term. It may take a while, and who knows, by the time it finds a home, the next generation of equipment may be out, and some of that generation may just be completely obsolete.
Ted, any comments on the narrative resetting opportunity we see here?
Yeah, I mean, it's as old as Bitcoin, well, almost as old as Bitcoin itself, that the mining was centralized in China, and therefore it was unfair or inaccurate to say that Bitcoin was decentralized. And this is basically one more FUD, one more perceived threat to Bitcoin that's getting knocked down. Bitcoin is inevitable, and for an individual, character is destiny. For a society, culture is destiny. And for a money, characteristics are destiny. And Bitcoin has the characteristics of hard money in greater aggregate amount than anything human beings have ever had access to. And it's inevitable that it's going to be adopted, and it's going to be ubiquitous. So all we're seeing is the inevitable defeat of these quote unquote risks, or more accurately FUD, that people say is going to bring Bitcoin down. So in this case, it's just another pin, that pin being, it's too centralized in China, that's being knocked down.
Well said. Well, gentlemen, I've had you on for a while here. This has been really eye-opening. I mean, frankly, Ted, when I saw that you'd made the move, I know you don't take these decisions lightly, and so I looked into Greenidge and wanted to peek beneath the veil. The way that it was characterized in the press, I knew was not representative of reality, and this has been incredibly encouraging to hear the ways you guys are being so thoughtful about mining responsibly and onshoring hash rate. Any concluding thoughts or anything else you'd like to say about Greenidge that we haven't had the chance to say yet?
No, the only thing I think I'd like to touch on is, we try not to make comparisons of why we're better, or why we think we're better than any other miner that's out there. We are different in that we own our own generation, but I think the thing that really differentiates us is our people, and the fact that we perform all of our functions in-house. And I think that's going to become increasingly important. Not doing it in-house necessarily, but operating a mine efficiently as the mines globally, not just in the US, really significantly ramp up in terms of their size and scale. You need to have fundamental operational KPIs and metrics and procedures and protocols that you're following in order to maintain your uptime, because miners break. that there it's like any other operating asset. It's a fleet of assets out there, and if you operate a fleet of trucks, some are going to break down. If you operate a fleet of miners, some are going to break down. And we do all that in-house with our staff. And as we move to new locations, new geographies, we're going to take the same staff and use our existing staff to help train people and manage people in new locations. And the only thing I really think differentiates us as a miner is our people. I think, yes, the power plant aspect is different, but when it comes down to it, miners are all looking for lower cost electricity. We achieve lower cost electricity because we have the plant, but everyone's striving for lower cost electricity. Everyone is buying more or less the same equipment. And I think ultimately, in the maybe not the immediate term, but in the medium term, what you do with that equipment at some point is going to matter. And I think that we have the people in house that we're really proud of that can help manage that as we grow.
Yeah, Jeff said it best about Greenidge itself. I think it's a self-contained company that's poised to be dominant and very beneficial to the ecosystem, and that's why I joined it, and I'm grateful for that. But Nick, I also wanted to say, I'm grateful to you and all the writing and time you put into this and all the study you put into it. You and a few other people, you don't need to do that. No one needs you to do that. You stuck your neck out there. You continue to in this debate, and it's really, really helpful. And we do need people that can refute misinformation and put things in perspective and keep things in context. So grateful for that, and thank you.
Oh, that's kind of you to say. It's my privilege, and honestly, I find it very interesting to look into Bitcoin's energetic dynamics. So it's rewarding in its own right. This has been really great, guys. I'm really glad we could do this, and very excited to get the actual truth out there. Truth matters. So let's. That's all I wanted to do, and you guys did great. So thanks again for coming on today.
Thank you for having us.